All right, folks. David is out again this week, so I'll be running the meeting, I guess, today. Please make sure you've included yourself as an attendee here on the agenda, and we can go ahead and get started. All right. It looks like Josh has already gone ahead and self-selected to be our note taker. Thanks, Josh. Any new faces? I'm not seeing anyone who hasn't been here previously. So I think we can jump straight into reviewing the outstanding RFCs. We have quite a few here still. Starting from the bottom, Quarkus Buildpack. Does anyone know the status of this one?
I believe ready to merge. I was supposed to, I just haven't got a chance to yet.
Okay. This health checker Buildpack.
It's the same. I think last week we just put out a call for any final comments. I didn't see any, so I think we're ready to merge on this one.
Great. And support for Yarnberry.
Yeah, I guess the one outstanding thing is this comment here exactly. I saw Frankie left a comment about what they would find more intuitive. I just wanted to confirm, Ryan, that that's also what you would find more intuitive, since you had asked the question further above here. And then if that is the case, I can just go ahead and make those changes.
Yeah, I think it is. I think I didn't explain it well, but I think I was saying in choosing one or the other, I think it's going to be confusing for the other party, right? So if you choose node modules, it's probably going to be confusing for folks using Berry. And if you choose node packages, it's going to be confusing for those who expect node modules. So I think it does make sense to do what Frankie is proposing here, where it's like you actually have it provide whichever one it's going to, and then you have OR branching logic in the other build packs in order to support both cases.
All right, fair enough. Yeah, I'm willing to add the additional logic for the sake of clarity. So sounds good.
I'm just mostly thinking about the case where like detection fails, right? And users want to be able to reason about like, what am I missing? Why is the detection failing? And that's mostly where they end up seeing this, right?
Right, yeah. Looks like there's a new, oh, that's just note taking. Got you. Cool, I'll do that then.
Great. Moving on from here, we've got this Dependency Management Rrc. This one's been outstanding for a while. I don't know if Sophie's here. I don't see her on the call. I kind of wanted to push forward on this to ask if there's a reason why we shouldn't just go ahead and submit and merge what we have here. I think it's going to be really, really hard for us to think through and have like a, I guess like a, you know, perform like a mental experiment of how this is going to work in our heads and in an RFC process without actually implementing this and doing something. I think the broad strokes of what's outlined in the RFC are pretty clear. And I think unless folks have some real objections to the broad strokes direction, then it doesn't necessarily make sense for us maybe to spend a lot more time just nitpicking the details. So those are my thoughts on it. I was kind of wondering what other folks thought.
I'm not necessarily opposed to that. I did have a question that I had posted today kind of late around the removal of stacks in build packs, and a lot of the terminology in these dependency management proposals is around stacks. Is that intentional in that we're deferring that problem until later, or do we want to potentially try to like address that in with these proposals as well?
I think it makes sense to defer it until we have stuff we can actually work with that behaves in a way that's different. Like, I don't know, we've gotten caught out a couple of times where we try to implement something ahead of when CNB actually implements it, and stuff changes significantly enough or gets disrupted significantly enough that we're kind of left holding the bag. I kind of hesitate now to be so proactive in implementing those types of APIs. I'd rather CNB finish their work, solidify what the API looks like before we start to jump on an implementation on our end.
Can I get more background on that question? It sounds like there's some upcoming work around the Stacks API, and that maybe this dependency might have accounted for that, but it sounds like we don't want that to be accounted for yet.
So there's an Rfc that was approved at the Buildpacks level to, I guess, in a nutshell, simplify some things with Buildpacks, and basically it removes the concepts of mixins and the concepts of stacks. And I believe mixins are just kind of going away, but stacks is like basically just calling it what it really is, like an OS, architecture combination. Yeah, here, if you look at the like the thing that they're proposing, it's not like fundamentally that different. So the question, I guess, would be, do we want to try to make this proposal generic to, to fit a more of a target, or something, as opposed to calling it stacks, or do we just stick with stacks for now and say this is a problem for later? I definitely understand what Ryan's saying. That has happened. So I think that's a concern if we want to, if we try to jump the gun a little bit, maybe, I don't know.
I guess it's just the way I view it is like that particular thing, which is like what are the specific pieces of metadata that appear in the Buildpack TOML, is like only a tiny fraction of the details that are outlined in the broader Dependencies Rfc. And to me, they don't seem like something that we would run into a lot of issues with if we just deferred making a decision on that front to a point in the future where you can actually use those those particular options. Maybe
a better question is, do we see any reason that we couldn't easily switch to this in the future? If it's something that we can do without causing too much fuss, then it really doesn't seem like it's a big deal. I guess that was my concern, is like, if we make all these changes now and then, this happens 3 months from now and it lands, then we got to make like a whole bunch of changes again. Are we breaking stuff again and causing more disruption? Or do we think it's something that this can be like, hey, we just need to add some properties and deprecate stack and hey, we're good to go. Like, I'm not sure which of those it would be, but if it's not going to be a hard migration, then deferring seems like definitely the right option.
I've got something like feels more like a side question as this is coming up, and that might need reaching out to CNB. There's, for example, the proc file Buildpack that decides based on the tiny stag ID if it's thinking that there's a bash or not, or no bash available. So there's actually some encodings in there which I don't see supported here. And like, there's no way a stack could transfer that information, right? Something like a bash is available or not. That's actually what mixins could have been for. They are going to be removed. So it might be a thing that we want to actually reach out and see, well, it can still have an ID. Okay.
I think this is what this field is for. I don't remember the specifics around the conversation, and it likely isn't actually outlined in the RFC or in the changes in the spec, like contextually why this thing exists. But I believe the conversation around that particular field was related to this aspect of like, the build environment needs to know something about the run environment and the way of like passing that information, I guess, is through like this optional ID.
I mean, honestly, I think putting that on an ID is actually maybe even problematic. Like it somehow limits some things. You couldn't produce a stack that doesn't have a bash, but it's not called tiny, right? You would actually have to occupy the ID that Paketo is giving if you want the proc file Buildpack to do what you expect it to do. So that's actually, yeah, anyway. I mean, mixins are already on the way out, so I guess that would have been something like that for that kind of communication about capabilities. Anyway, I realize it is more a side question, but it might have been worth putting to the table because there's something where Buildpacks are actually using the stack information. But if you say like this is still possible, then that's one of the things here. Still a bit unfortunate.
Yep, I agree. Having some more flexibility on that front would be great.
Sorry. To Dan's point about the migration, from my reading of the current RFCs, like as a Buildpack author, I'm envisioning writing the like get new versions or get metadata to, and like, you know, in that function, it'll do something like map a given stack ID to a given target, meaning like Docker environment in which to compile a dependency, for example. And that mapping will need to be encoded in there so we can produce the appropriate output. And I think it will honestly be easier even once we're using this target's metadata as opposed to a stack ID to establish which build target, aka build environment, we should be like compiling our dependency in. So to my mind, there's not concerns around the migration from stack to targets or whatever the new terminology is.
Okay. Yeah, that seems reasonable. You know, if we think it's an easy change, then yeah, it seems like a no-brainer just to proceed and deal with that when we have to. Cool. I'm okay with that.
All right. I'll reach out to Emily because I think we're maybe also missing some possible feedback from her about this particular one. But other than that, I think any of the folks on the dependencies, like maintainer group, if you're looking to close this one out, I feel like you should feel like it's unblocked at this point.
Yeah, I'm sorry I joined late and I think I missed the beginning of the conversation, but is anything needed? I heard Dan's concerns around stacks going away. I think we're good there, but was there anything else at the beginning that I might have missed that I need to look into?
I think I outlined that I think the RFCs are in a good enough state that we should feel like we can actually move forward on this, and that I'm really worried that we could spend many more weeks nitpicking the finer details of all of the metadata and all of the inputs and outputs of every action and workflow. And that would ultimately be detrimental to us actually delivering anything useful for Paketo in the short term. And so my argument was, unless someone really sees something that they think is blocking this, we should probably get to a point where we can say this is good enough for what we expect out of an RFC, especially one of this magnitude, and move into a phase where we actually start to implement things and deal with the details of that implementation as they arise. Cool. I'm not hearing a ton of objection, but I think we probably will have this open for a couple more days. If folks feel like they have thoughts on that front, you should definitely respond in the RFC. All right, moving on from there, we've got this Rfc New Feature Checklist. I think where this stood last time, at least I heard about it, and we were going to rewrite this in a form that maybe was more detailed. I can't tell if Forrest did this. Does anyone else have any idea what might be going on here?
So I heard Forrest was experimenting with the diagramming software. I wasn't sure from him if he was feeling like those diagrams were done. If you look at the rendered version, there's like a extremely long diagram at the bottom. Yes, extremely long. I'm not sure whether it needs more things.
Okay. We could probably skip over this one this week since Forrest is out. Moving on, Python dependencies.
Hey, yeah, that's me. This has been open for a little bit. I'd love to chat with Rob and Tim after this, get this closed out. Basically, as things stand, quick summary, there are 4 Paketo hosted dependencies in the Python language family. CPython, Poetry, pip, and pip env. What this RFC proposes is to remove 2 of those as Paketo hosted dependencies. That's pipenv and Poetry, because they're being just pip installed inside the build pack anyways. We're not actually making use of the dependency. There's some feedback here from Sophie and from Rob about we still want to make sure that we have I'm losing the word, but we reproducibility and some other things. So we actually will want to hard code the version that we want to install as a default version in the build pack toml metadata. And my understanding is of how that might work is we'll probably need some sort of custom workflow in those build packs to check for new updates and like pull them in as the default version, which I don't know that our dependency workflows will do just that bit. But maybe Sophie, we could chat about that afterwards. But as the RFC stands right now, we'll have to have some like custom workflow to go check for new versions of pipenv and Poetry, and PR those new versions in as the next default version for those dependencies. But I think all the feedback has been addressed. I appreciate the feedback so far. And another thing, I did update the section on the CPython dependency to reflect the fact that we'll need a different dependency for the Jammy stack than Bionic. Those dependencies will not be interchangeable, so we'll have to build them separately, host them separately, and list them separately in the build pack toml. But once it gets into build pack toml, everything else should just work.
Great. Thanks for the update, Josh. Let's see, propose to add open telemetry support for Java. Dan, do you
believe
know?
we're still waiting for the author to come back with a few changes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it doesn't look like anything since here. Okay. RFC to publish images to ECR. I see some conversation here between Dan and Kevin. Is this hashed out or worth having a discussion here?
I think it's just that kind of last sticking point on this issue, which is, how do we manage this, fairly, when someone else wants to have the images published to their particular cloud repo. And I think Kevin is basically, suggesting, there's a IBM Red Hat container registry. So that could be another potential target. And so I think that just kind of speaks to the section that Emily added. So I don't know if everyone has had a chance to take a look at that. If you click that link in my comment there, it'll take you to it. Or not. It's other cloud providers there. So this is what Emily added, basically as kind of to try to put some ground rules in place for how we would evaluate adding to other potential cloud providers, and it would basically just mean meeting these checkboxes here, and then also going through an RFC. I think she's proposing that each new distribution target would have a RFC to support that.
I think that makes sense. Give us a chance to weigh these particular things.
Yeah. And my only other thought on this was if there is perhaps some opportunity to use integrating more closely with some of these providers as a way to get metrics for the build packs. It's kind of an age-old story. We don't have a lot of usage metrics on build packs, and perhaps by hosting with some of these other providers, there's a potential we could get metrics from them on, even if they're basic, anonymous type metrics. It could be a benefit to us as well for going through these extra steps.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought for sure. Okay, so next steps seem to be getting any sort of last minute approvals on this. Where are we? Yeah. I guess I can go through and read this and give some approval on it. Not hearing any other thoughts. I think we can move on then. Up next is this RFC reduce build complexity of .NET runtimes.
This is a collaborative effort between me and Forrest. And I guess Sophie's the other .NET maintainer, so this maybe has enough approvals from the .NET side of things. It's just proposing a small re-architecture of the .NET build pack to move us towards using more externally hosted dependencies instead of rolling our own for .NET, and also to support building more efficient images for self-contained apps. It really simplifies things a lot.
Great. Looking forward to seeing that. Up next, amend RFC 038, make CycloneDX SBOMs reproducible.
There hasn't been a ton of activity on this. We have one steering committee approval already. It's a pretty small change. If you have concerns about it, please make them known soon.
Yeah, I think I already agree that this is fine. I just haven't taken the time to click the approve button, so I will do that. And then another SBOM change, RFC to generate reproducible SPDX SBOMs.
Likewise, not a ton of activity on here. This one's a slightly meatier change. It involves making a decision about how we're gonna sort of make a reproducible hash of the contents of an SBOM. If you have thoughts about how that should be done, or what the impact of this would be for you, please leave them on this RFC.
All right. And then proposes to add an APM tooling team and 8 new APM build packs.
Yeah, just looking for more feedback on this. I updated it to include the detection criteria and basically actions that are taken, as well as the languages supported by each one. So that should hopefully just give a little more insight into what we're getting from this. Yeah, and I think that was the open questions that we had from last week.
All right. Not hearing a lot more on that. We can move on to proposes to rename build packs.
I have not looked at this one since the last week. There didn't seem to be a lot of objection to it. So I guess, yeah, just take a look and approve if you are voting on this one.
Great. And finally, Rfc Web Servers Re-Architecture. I think this one is a new one from Forrest, who is not here. I can maybe walk through this unless someone else is more familiar with this. All right. What I can say about it that I know is that the current HTTPD and Nginx build packs are relatively complex in what they offer. They basically offer 3 distinct pieces of functionality. They'll install the designated server. So they'll install Nginx or HTTPD. They will set a start command, so they know how to actually properly invoke each one of those servers. So it will start and watch the files that it's supposed to be serving. And then lastly, they encapsulate a bunch of what we have been calling zero configuration functionality. This is just stuff that, if you say, give me an Nginx server, you don't actually have to provide like an Nginx conf in order to get one that will have reasonable defaults. And so what Forrest is proposing is that we take each one of those 2 build packs and split it apart to actually have each part in its own build pack. So I think ultimately we'll end up with 6 build packs instead of the 2 that we have currently, but that each one will be much more encapsulated in terms of the feature set that it offers. This should just help maintenance burden overall and reduce some of the complexity around this code bases. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, if you're on the web servers maintainer team, maybe have a look at this one and provide some feedback.
Does that
ahead,
flow
Josh.
into other language families? I know PHP will use HTTPD and Nginx, so I assume that there'd have to be changes made there. Are there other language families?
Interestingly enough, the bits that are in PHP, there's actually code that had to be added to the Nginx and HTTPD build packs that actually make them like behave better in cases where users are only using like one portion of that functionality. And so having the build packs split up where you get like either just install Nginx or set a start command, so on and so forth, that would probably allow the build pack that's in the PHP family to behave better than it is, say, today currently. And so I don't actually think there would be much change in PHP in order to adopt what's proposed here, because PHP really only wants that first feature, which is install this server somewhere on the file system so that I can run it. It generates its own configuration. It sets its own start command. So I think ultimately for like consumers of the web servers build packs, this might actually be like a net positive.
One concern that comes to mind is how the base and full builders are in terms of the maximum number of Docker layers that are possible. We've had problems with this in the past. Like there was a bug where there were duplicate layers and then we ran into that boundary very quickly. Since I know that there are people who use web servers on full, which is our biggest builder, I would definitely want to know like how close are we to the limit now? And with this proposed re-architecture, how many layers would the full builder have then? I think this is still useful, but then we might need to have a conversation about if we're going to start demoting things out of the full builder.
That's fair. I think we maybe will prompt the conversation I think we've been putting off for quite a while, which is just how useful is it to have these like super builders where you don't have to tell the, the building platform anything about the type of application you're building, versus say a builder that's scoped around a language or other kind of use case. Anyway, feel free to check this one out. It's an interesting one. I think it'll help reduce the complexity on those two build packs. I've done a bit of work in both of them recently, and they are quite gnarly. So I definitely appreciate the thought and the direction on this one. So that brings us to the end of the outstanding RFCs. The next item on the agenda here is Cnb updates and questions. Does anyone know what's going on in Cnb land these days? It doesn't sound like anyone knows of anything that's of terrible import at the moment. So we can move on to project updates. Are there folks interested in providing a project update today?
We are.
Yeah,
Oh, go for it, Frankie. I'll go after.
you go.
Okay. I was going to say we're very close to releasing the Jammy full stack. We ran into one little issue on the release, but after that, hopefully we'll have the Jammy full stack released this week, and then hopefully we'll have builders, and then all of the then we're like working on getting all the build packs working on the Jammy builders. So that's exciting, and it's like coming to a close pretty quickly. But obviously we'll give an official announcement when everything is released and ready for use.
On a somewhat related note, .NET Core is on Jammy. It's available in the Jammy base builder that has build packs, and you can also, of course, use it with the Buildpacks builder.
Awesome. Those are both very great updates. All right. That brings us to the end of the agenda. Is there anything else that folks wanted to discuss in our working group meeting before we adjourn? It doesn't sound like it. All right, folks. Well, this has been great. Thank you for your attendance, and we'll see you next week.